I think we can all agree that there is a lot of information on fishing out there, and it can be hard working out what is honest and good advice and what is total garbage. It's everywhere in the fishing industry, and in a world where people will say basically anything for a 10% discount or the opportunity to pay cost price for a product, I've often found it hard to decipher the good information from the bad, particularly because it plagues most Australian TV adventure shows. I remember 6 or so years ago when I was in my kayak, I would idolise the guys with bass boats fishing in our ABT tournament series. Steve Morgan brought live streaming and weigh-ins to our devices, and it was new and exciting, and it brought all these people that I'd seen pictures of on social media and in tournament magazines into my living room. With that access though came product placement, and I have to admit I fell for it. I'd go out in my kayak and throw the same coloured crank crab that Camo had thrown in the Hawkesbury and that atomic Ghost Gill 38 that Greg Cito threw in the harbour. In these instances, those examples were great ones, but in 50% of the time, I found that I was wasting my money. I would eventually grow to realise that there was no shortage of anglers who were going to push their own agenda because they had a promotional agreement with a company, or were sharing posts of their favourite brand so that they could get on that brand's good side and potentially suck up for product. Don't get me wrong, the majority of anglers believe genuinely in the products that they use, but as a guy who wants to try everything and experience what all the different brands have got to offer, I did fall for it. And I can't count the amount of bad purchases that I've made because anglers I looked up to sold out. Now, I'm not blaming anyone or having a stab. The errors I made were my own. At its core, this is why I started this channel. Today we're going to talk about fishing line, and I'm going to pass on to you a working knowledge of leader and straight through fluorocarbon, because there are differences and you don't want to get it wrong. I'll talk about the brands and the products that I have confidence in, and at the end of this you'll understand when to use one type of fluorocarbon and not the other. You should definitely never buy fluorocarbon from the cheap bucket bin, and I'll explain why. But of course, there is a giveaway, so let's get into it. Broadly speaking, in the light estuary game, there are two types of fluorocarbon on the market. The first is fluorocarbon leader that's designed to be attached to braid. The second FC is FC that fills the spool, and you might have heard that called straight through or spinning fluoro. They are both designed and manufactured to perform differently and have different qualities on the water. If you get it wrong, it'll cost you an arm and a leg to keep doing what you're doing, or on the other space, you'll have the disadvantage when you're fighting a fish. Firstly, if you consider FC that's designed to go on the end of braid, as in a leader, you can appreciate that this line will spend most of its time in the water near the fish. That means the line's going to be beaten up against cockleweed, it's going to get wrapped around poles, bump against rocks and suffer general abuse against the sticks. A company that makes line knows this, and that type of fluorocarbon will typically be harder, fatter, have a little bit more abrasion resistance than the other softer version. You'll find that because that fluorocarbon is generally thicker than the other version, it will have less spring to the line, and when you combine it with braid, that means that you're going to get really nice sensitivity and feel almost everything that's going on with the lure at the other end. You'll see the hits and you'll see that tick of the line when a fish hits it, and it's the reason that whenever I'm throwing soft plastics, braid and leader combos are what I use. I can really set that hook, and there's no real springboard effect with the line. As soon as I set the hook in the jaw of the fish's mouth, I know that it's in there, and as soon as I do it, that action is imparted on the jig head. I think if you're starting out in fishing, you should exclusively stay with that braid and leader combination. It is a pretty good all-round position to fish with, and I probably do 60 to 70% of my fishing today with that combination. It's a good way to experience lures for the first time, really feel what's going on the end of the line, and you get some really nice feedback. So you're never really wondering what's going on with the lure. You're always, you're getting that feedback, so the fishing is interesting. Now, there are more scenarios, but there are three main reasons why I want to move away from braid and leader. The first restriction that I really notice is that when I'm fishing around structure, when line is under tension, it is much more easy to cut braid than it is fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is much more abrasion resistant than it is braid, and I'd much rather be wrapped around a pole with the fluorocarbon component over the braid component. If I make a suicide cast in the racks and the fish takes that lure, I'll often open the bail arm and let the fish run. And then I'll go through the process of handling the braid carefully to get that fish back. Think about when you're rigging braid, it is much easier to snip braid when it's under tension than it is when it is loose and dangling around the place. So that's why I open the bail arm. So that heavy structure and that nickability, if you like, or that abrasion resistance is definitely something that I consider. Secondly, like I said before, there's no suspension in braid, and whilst that is a strength, it can also be its weakness. So if you're fishing lures that have trebles on a braid leader combo, it's a good idea to back your drag off if you can. That way you don't put too much pressure on those trebles once you're hooked and you have a hook set in the fish's mouth. There is less forgiveness and suspension in the line with a braid leader combo, and I 100% have lost fish because of it. The last thing to consider is line shadow. In nature, there are not many things that occur in straight lines. If you cast over a long, shallow flat in particular and start to work your line across that shallow glassed out flat with nothing but sun, then the braid will cast a shadow across the water and under it. It spooks fish, and if you haven't seen it happen, it's just a matter of time you will see it happen. Like I said, 60 to 70% of the time though, I'm using a braid leader combo. When it's glassed out, maybe I'm in heavy structure or I'm using lures that have got trebles, I am now biasing and considering straight through fluorocarbon. So off the wall, straight through fluorocarbon is a little bit more softer, it's thinner, and it's more supple than the leader counterpart. Because it's softer, it means less line memory on the spool, and when you cast it out, it will naturally perform better than if you were to get it wrong and grab the other stuff. At a store, without asking anyone, there's 3 ways to really tell the difference. The first is to look at the product and have a read of the description. You're looking for words like straight through fluorocarbon, or I guess the second would be spinning fluoro is another term. The third is the length of the line. Generally, spinning fluoro you get in 120 or 120 meter spools as a minimum. 100 meters and under generally is the fluorocarbon that's designed to get attached to braid. So around about that 120 above is the mark that you're looking for. The thing I really like about my straight through fluorocarbon is that I get a great amount of suspension in the lines. It's this really nice cushioning effect when a fish turns around and turns its head and decides to run. I know that I don't have to work as hard to keep those hooks in its mouth than I would if it was in a braid combination. The drag doesn't have to be as precisely set, and the hookup rate and probability that I'll land the fish is much higher. So I recommend straight through fluorocarbon for crankbaits and jerkbaits. There is a philosophy out there that they go really well on cranky crabs as well, but I've heard arguments of both sides of fishing, and I prefer a braid leader combo on that space. When you do eventually start to make the switch across to fluorocarbon, and you definitely should, you will notice that the very first thing you lose, I guess, is the amount of sensitivity that you get in the rod. My advice would be not to worry too much about it. You'll get used to the feeling, but trust your gear. That lure is working like it is meant to be working out there. You just might not be able to feel it. It did take me a few outings to get used to and to develop the trust, and nothing develops trust like catching fish. So just give it some time, get used to it, and the rewards will come. Secondly, and I alluded to it in my last video, but you'll notice that casting with fluorocarbon isn't great. You probably take about I don't know, a 10 to 15% penalty in distance. It's a sacrifice and a trade that I'm happy to make, but as a general rule, I try and put my fluorocarbon on my higher end reels that help promote that line coming off and are better at casting. If you don't have any higher end reels, that's also fine. Then I'd look at biasing my longer rods. I think more of a factor out of all of that though is the direction of the wind. Try and always cast with the wind as opposed to into it, because that's going to be a huge penalty no matter what type of line you're using. So those are the differences between the products on the water and how they perform. Let's talk about the products that I specifically, and the brands that I use. When it comes to braid and leader, the braid that I use for anything under 10 pound is a JML product called Yamato Chinu Harris Fighter. Now, I've got a box of it in my boat, and I've found this stuff really enjoyable to use. I'm very, very happy to recommend it, and there's some affiliate links below if you're that way inclined and want to help the channel. 4 pound is definitely my favorite, and I will drop to 3 pound every now and again when the bite is tough, but understand that the drop from 4 pound to 3 pound is a 25% reduction in strength for a very small diameter change. I can also recommend the 6 pound. That is a little bit more solid than the 4 pound, and I know a lot of people like 6, 8, and 10 over they're light game like 4 like I'm talking about. I will quickly shout out to Hot Tackle. I do buy my stuff or that leader in bulk from those guys, and they've been super supportive of this channel, so a big thank you out to you guys. Now, the majority of fishing I do is under 10 pounds, so Chinu Harris covers me for most applications, and I am actually tracking some new fluorocarbon that's coming to market over the next year. So in a year's time, I might be talking about something different, but I am very, very happy to recommend this stuff, to the point where we're going to give away 5 rolls of either this stuff that we're talking about now or the stuff I'm talking about in a moment. To enter that, all you need to do is like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below on the breakdown of what leader combos you would like from this Chinu Harris stuff to the spinning fluoro that we're about to talk about. You know, whether it's 3 packs of this at £4 and 2 packs of that at £6, whatever, let me know in the comments. Speaking of spinning fluoro, this one has been a bit of a journey for me because I've had a bunch of different bird's nests and blow ups and snaps and breakages over my journey. For me, there is 2 products that I rate, and if it's not on the walls, I won't buy it. The first is Sunline Game FC. It's an EJ Todd, I think EJ Todd bring it in, and the other is J Thread Finesse. That's been out for about a year, but they haven't had it in stock for a good 5 months. In both of those products, both the 3 and the £4 work really well, and again, I'm very happy to recommend those. I'll leave you with a couple of cautions and considerations for when you're using fluorocarbon for the first time. I would recommend that as a default, you try and underspool your line. The Stella that I'm going to show you here is what I would consider overspooled. It might not look like that to you, but I reckon it is overspooled. The thing that I'm trying to avoid by underspooling a line is the amount of spring that's in that line jumping the top of the spool. And if you overspill it, or if you overfill it and you cast out, you might find that all that line gets dragged out and you'll end up with a bit of a bird's nest. It's a naturally springy line, so it's definitely something to think about. And if you're going to have any issues with fluorocarbon or straight through fluoro, it's generally going to be on the first and second outing. Now, if you do end up with a bit of a bird's nest, just cut it at the end of the bird's nest and go again. It might take an outing or 2 for that line to settle into its new shape and new spool, particularly as it gets wet, it stretches, you fight a fish or 2, and that line relays itself onto your reel. So that's the problem of it bird nesting. If you are finding though that the line is popping or you're getting some sort of failure rate with it, then it's probably past its due by date. And straight through fluoro, or all fluorocarbon for that matter, actually has a shelf life, which is why I recommend you avoid the stuff in a bucket bin. You might have come across spools before that, you know, you grab and then you just pull and, you know, it pops much lighter than its breaking strain. Well, that's an example of fluorocarbon that's either been left in the sun, exposed to the heat of the back of your car, or has passed its shelf life. I mean, you might get lucky with the bucket bin, but I reckon it's got disaster written all over it. I should also mention as well, FG knots every day of the week for my braid to leader combinations. It might take you a little while to tie them, but I can assure you, eventually you will just be doing them in less than a minute and you are good to go. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe. Remember the giveaway. I'll see you next time.